Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of An Unexpected Fight, a pediatric cancer podcast. Amber and I have a wonderful guest today. Her name is Courtney Mount, and she is the author of Millie Finds Her Miracle. And we're going to talk about her journey with her daughter and a little bit about her book. So, hey, Courtney, how are you doing today?
Thank you, ladies, for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Amber, you wanna start us off?
Yeah. So, Courtney, can you take us back to the beginning before diagnosis and tell us a little bit about your family and about Millie?
Would love to. Back in 2016, Millie was born, ninth child in our family. We'd had children over 26 years, so we kind of had some adults, some teenagers, some children, and then this baby. And just a regular, whatever regular, normal homeschooling family was, we had busy days where we were schooling the children, going to sports activities, doing piano lessons, all kinds of stuff. Millie was born perfectly healthy, as far as we can tell. During her second year, right around her birthday, she began crying a lot. She would just fuss and fuss at us and almost became known as being a bratty kid. I mean, you hate to say that, but you couldn't put her down. You had to hold her all the time. She didn't want to eat anything. She just was fussy. It became a very hard time in our lives.
I bet. Can you tell us a little bit about those initial days of when you kind of realized that you needed to get her checked out, or that you kind of, I know for me with my daughter, I had like that gut feeling like something is wrong. Did you kind of have those moments?
Isn't that crazy that we all have that gut feeling and we battle
Yeah.
it and we go and we're sure, we take them to the doctor and we're sure they're okay, and then we take them again and know they're fine. And so Millie's second birthday was in November, and by January I'd already had her in the doctor, and maybe she had an ear infection. She was given some amoxicillin, something, to clear that up. Then we went back a few months later. She was still fine, just fussy, nothing. We went to Grand Canyon in May, and while we were there, she fevered all week that we were there. And I actually got online to a mom's group and just posted a little thing that said, "This is my ninth child, and you think I would know. But if you had these symptoms, what would you ladies do?" And of course, they said things like, maybe it's pandas, maybe it's C. diff. They had all kinds of ideas. And one lady said, "I would have her blood tested." She said, "I don't want to tell you something that's going to scare you, but with what my son had, I think you need a blood test." And of course, I ventured with, "What did your son have?" And she said, "Leukemia." And a lot of the children on our board have the same symptoms Millie has. So that got me thinking. As I went back home that next week, I took her to the doctor, put her up on a table. She was fine. Nothing. She looked perfect. The doctor handed me a CBC slip and said, "I want you to go take her for a blood test if she starts having issues again. But today she looks good." So I stuffed that in my purse, came home. 2 weeks later, I was having a meeting here at my house. And as I walked the people out to the car to leave, I came back in and she was up in the middle of my bed with her hand pressed to her stomach, moaning, saying, "Oh, my belly hurts, Mama, my belly hurts." And I remember dialing the phone to my husband and just saying, "We've got to do something." And he's so funny because he said, "I can stop and get laxatives." And I said, "No, we've tried laxatives, because chronically constipated, which now I know goes with that type of cancer. But we had already tried laxatives. And I said, "No, we're not doing that. We are going to urgent care." And so we went into the urgent care that night. And they were almost closing. I walked up to the window and I just said, "We're here because we think she's impacted." And the lady said, "Have you had an x-ray?" I said, "No, we haven't." So she took us back in the room and they laid her back on the table. And when they did, it was like scales just fell off her eyes. We had this little baby with this huge swollen belly, little scrawny arms and legs. It reminded me like the little Ethiopian babies you see on the, World Hunger videos.
Yeah.
And I don't even know when she got that way. I mean, she was just always my chubby little baby. And then all of a sudden she wasn't. She was just sick. From there, they sent us to our local hospital to have an x-ray. The x-ray said, yes, she was constipated. So we're going to give her an enema and a suppository. They did all of that, tortured the poor baby, got the results they wanted. And he said, we're going to release you to go home. And I said, no, before you do, you need to fill up her stomach. I found a lump next to her belly button. And he said, ma'am, I felt it 10,000 stomachs, and that lump is nothing to be worried about. However, her liver edge is distended. It's too low. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, we're going to do some a blood test. So they went ahead and did that blood test that we hadn't had yet. And they came back with her liver enzymes were elevated. So again, he said, I'm going to refer you on to the Children's Hospital, but for tonight, you can go ahead and take her home. And we went home. That next day, the Children's Hospital called and said, you need to be here the following morning. And that was another adventure because our Children's Hospital is kind of slow. If you get referred there, you might be 6 weeks to go see them. And we're going the next day. I mean, it was like, this must be serious. So they sent us to the liver specialist that morning, and we put her up on the table. And once again, that little corker looked fine. She said, I really don't see anything wrong with her. She must have food allergies. She said, maybe she has celiac disease. And I said, well, my husband's gluten-free. Maybe that could be part of it. I don't know. So she said, before you leave this hospital, we're going to do an ultrasound and a blood test, and then we'll go from there. And so I remember walking out of her office and texting our church prayer chain and saying they think it's food allergies, and, we're excited that that's all it is. Then I texted my husband that same text and added, but you need to come to the hospital. We're going to do a blood test again, and I don't want to do it alone after what she'd just been through the night before. So he works about 3 miles from the hospital. He met me up there, and I said, while I'm waiting on you, I will go do the ultrasound. And so we did. Got on the ultrasound table. The little ultrasound tech was so sweet, just chattering with me and said, my dad works where your husband works. And we were having a great visit, and all of a sudden she just got really quiet, just deathly quiet, not saying anything. And I asked her, or I said to her, if there's something you see and we need to be seen by a doctor today, then because we live a long way from home. Our hospital's almost an hour from our home. And so she said, well, my husband came in right at that point. She said, y'all go ahead and wait in the waiting room, and I'll have a doctor come out and meet you. And someone did come out. They sent us back to the liver specialist. I can remember riding the elevator up there, waiting in their waiting room. I remember the liver specialist coming out and saying, you're going to the 10th floor. I don't know if she said oncology. I don't know if she said cancer. I don't really have a memory of what she said or if I even knew what oncology was. That was the beginning of that horrible day.
Yeah. So can you take us through those next days? Were you guys admitted to inpatient? Kind of. Can you tell us a little bit about basically, I guess, like the treatment plan and what they were telling you at that time?
Right. When we got off the elevator on the 10th floor, we were met by a real sweet little nurse that happened to be a friend of ours' nurse. Surprisingly, we had a friend that her son had leukemia, and she had reassured me it'll be okay. As you go up there, it'll be okay. And this lady was very friendly, and we were able to say we have mutual friends. And then also we ended up with the same doctor. Now, our child did not have leukemia. I didn't know at that point, but we did end up with the leukemia doctor because he was the one on call. As we went back to see him in the office, my husband and I have a totally different story of what happened that day. And I think that's trauma. He said, I think we went into this little blue exam room and the doctor said, I'm sorry, it looks like Amelia has cancer. By the way, her real name is Amelia Joy, but we nicknamed her Millie. And so my husband says, no, he never said that. He took us out into a large playroom, and that's where he came and told us she had cancer. And we've had to just kind of agree to disagree because neither one of us have a clue where he told us to go. But that day he said, she's stable. You can take her home. We won't start chemo till Monday. So there's no reason for you to sit in the hospital all weekend. And it was so odd to have them tell you your baby's body's filled with cancer, but go ahead and take her home. We did. We walked out of that hospital. We drove the hour home. We stopped halfway for a meal. And when I went into the restaurant, I just stood in front of the counter trying to order. Couldn't even get my thoughts together. And the sweet little woman at the counter said, can I help you? Are you okay? And I can't imagine what I looked like. I said, I'm not okay. They just said my baby has cancer. And she said, "Can I pray with you?" She grabbed my hands and prayed right there over the counter with me, ordered my food, and paid for it for me. So I thought right there, I knew God was walking with me through this, this stuff we were going in. We went home for the weekend, got our life settled as you can. We had a lot of kids at home. I think there were still 7 living at home at that time, and had to figure out who was going to be where, had to go buy clothes, try to get the house stocked with food, all these things you think, how long am I going to be gone? We didn't have a clue. Millie was admitted. She did her first round of chemo. But as she was doing that, he said, I feel like, well, I left out this part, I'm sorry. I did not hear him tell us what cancer it was. I heard him say it was a cancer that affected her adrenal gland and her kidney, and that there was a tumor around her kidney. But in my mind, I thought she had Wilms cancer. I heard him mention Wilms is in the kidney, and I was just relieved. I know children pass away of Wilms, but I know they have a high survival rate, much higher than neuroblastoma. So when we arrived on that Monday, or we arrived on Sunday, we stayed overnight. Monday morning early, we started. He said, today we're going to test you for neuroblastoma. And I just about fell over. I said, no, you are not. And my husband looked at me like my head had fallen off. He said, why are you acting like that? And I said, he said it was something else. He didn't say neuroblastoma, and he didn't know what neuroblastoma was. But we had had a friend whose child had died of neuroblastoma years ago. And so it would have, if a doctor had ever said that, I would have heard it, but I didn't. So they tested her for neuroblastoma. They did a fine needle aspiration. And when they did that, placed a Broviac and something else. Oh, the bone marrow aspiration the first day. By that evening, her little belly was looking really odd. And when I called the nurse in to look at it, they kind of pressed on it and it burst open and blood started spurting everywhere. And it was an exciting night. We got to go to PICU right off the bat. We were there 14 days. I think that first go round, took the frontline chemo. She eventually did 6 rounds of frontline chemo. We never saw a response. At the end of that, we evaluated, what can we do? Couldn't do surgery because nothing had shrunk. They were going to send us, they wanted to do immunotherapy next. So we did 9 rounds of immunotherapy. And then we were going to go to Cook's in Dallas to do the MIBG therapy. Are you familiar with that therapy?
I am, but if you want to go ahead and explain, though, that way people that are listening that don't know what that is.
We didn't actually go through with it, so I'll explain it the best way. We went to the tour, we got all set up to do it, and they canceled on us like the last day. But it's basically a lead-lined room where you put your child in this room for 4 to 6 days where you can't go in with them. They're kind of kept not really sedated, but sleepy, and they become radiated. And you can go in for like 30 minutes a few times a day, 10 minutes a few times a day to cut their food up, change their diaper, that kind of stuff. But you can't stay with them because you'll become toxic. So to me, that was crazy to think we'd be pumping our babies full of such toxins. And when they said things like, wear gloves, you don't want to get this on your skin, I'm thinking, but we're putting it in our children. It was just crazy. On the 8th round of immunotherapy, they had come in and said, it's not working. But we want to go ahead and do one more round to give us some coverage to get to MIBG therapy. So we did that. We went down to Cook's. We took the tour. They did a bone marrow aspiration. They did a CAT scan. They did the MIBG scan, all those things. And then they sent us back to Oklahoma, telling us to come back the following Monday and we'd have a port put in. They called us on Friday and said her tumor has grown. It's pressing the vein, exiting her liver, and she will not be eligible for this therapy because if we radiate her, it will destroy her liver immediately and kill her. So at that point, we had to go back into our home hospital. We had to take the ICE chemo with the idea that if that would shrink at all, we could go back and do MIBG. And it didn't do anything for her. That was about another 3 weeks. We waited, scanned again. Things were still growing rapidly. Her little waist was just getting huge because, oddly enough, her Curie score never got over a 2. which just still blows me away. But I have friends whose little children have a 28 Curie score, which is the Curie score. They divide your body up into 28 pieces, I think it is. And depending on how many areas have cancer, that's how high your score is. So she had her primary tumor on her right adrenal gland, and then her liver was filled with tumors. And her liver just kept continuing to grow bigger and bigger and bigger until it stopped working.
So how long
Can you tell us a little bit
was this
about
man?
what you were
Oh,
thinking
go
in
ahead.
those days?
We're very faith-filled, and we knew God could heal our baby. We also knew that a lot of children don't get healed this side of heaven. And so there was that huge struggle of, we're going to keep praying. We're going to pray and beg while there's breath, while there's life left. And we did, even to the point of 2 or 3 days before she passed away, we had a man ask if he could come pray over her one Sunday morning. And we allowed him to come. We don't know who he was. He drove here from a town about 2.5 hours away, came in, laid his hands on her, prayed over, left, assuring us she was going to be healed. That was kind of a bitter pill, because I know God could have healed her. He could have chose that. But as he left, I think we were almost embarrassed. Like, we didn't tell our kids he came. We didn't tell anybody else he came, because it's like we are just grasping that somebody has that line straight to God that we may not have, or I don't even know if that's the right way to say that. But, just begging him, please heal her. Early on in her journey, I had prayed, Lord, I ask that you heal her and let her tell her story of your goodness with her own mouth. That if you don't, I commit, I'll tell it for her. And that's what's gotten me to be right. I'm trying to keep my commitment of that sweet little girl that I miss so much.
Those are definitely hard pills to swallow, and I totally understand your thoughts. And it's hard to think, well, did I not pray enough, or did I not have the right person pray, or what could have saved her, but the unfortunate thing is we don't have enough good medicines for these kids, and there's not enough good research, and unfortunately they have to do things like stay in a room by themselves for days on end because it's too toxic for their adult caregiver to be in the room with them. And that's why I do this, is to hopefully one day help find cures for these cancers, for neuroblastoma, for leukemia, for ETMR, for whatever cancer that the child may end up with. Because like you, like Amber, like none of us expected this, and it was like your kid's fine until they're not, and then this is the life that you live. But I'd love to hear kind of. Oh, go ahead.
You have one foot in the cancer world, but we don't. We're no longer cancer moms, but we'll always be cancer moms. And it's such an odd place to live in the in-between. I remember my husband telling me a lot of her treatment was during COVID. And unfortunately, the hospital would not allow us both to be there, which was another devastating hit for us. Because we had so many children, I was at home with the children, and he would stay overnight with her. And he told me at night, when he would kiss her goodnight, his lips would just burn where the chemo was sweating out of her, her head or forehead. And so all the chemo that we have personally gotten on us, I was still breastfeeding her for a while. And I've thought about that. We're pumping her full and she's nursing. And yet I wouldn't have given that up for one moment. Just that time. They even told me at one point, you probably should stop nursing her. She's not getting anything. And I thought, no, you know what? She's getting comfort. The only thing in her life she can depend on right now is that her mom and daddy are right here for her. Because everybody that walked in that room, even if they cared for her, even if they loved her, they were probably going to hurt her. And she knew it. Just so sad what those kids go through and how smart they are. We would say early on, we're going to get scans. Well, she knew what scans were. So we changed it. We're going to go have our pictures made today. I don't want pictures. Nope, I'm not going, We had one night, we were sitting around our dinner table. We were all just getting ready to start dinner. My husband asked us to bow our head and pray, and we were all praying. And he said, Lord, be with us as we go to the hospital tomorrow. And her head popped up and she said, hospital? I'm not sick. Are you sick, Dad? I'm not going to the hospital. It's just like, you can forget it. I'm staying home.
Bless it.
the world missed out on a beautiful, wonderful little girl who was so smart because of this cancer.
Absolutely. So we'd love to hear a little bit about your book or your books that you've written, and tell us a little bit about those. And, obviously Millie was your inspiration for these books, and I'd love to, tell us where we can get them or where people can find them, and just a little bit about the book.
Okay. The first one I wrote was a long book that told the whole story. And when I did that, I had the idea that it would go to parents, people walking through this, people who wanted to hear kind of our whole journey. And it became very tedious, and it got put back on the shelf. I almost have that book finished. It's ready to go to the editor now, finally. But in the middle, I felt a real prompting that every day there were children dying that needed a children's book to tell them kind of what's going on, and not in a scary way, but maybe a gentle introduction to death. So I wrote a book called Millie Finds Her Miracle, and it's about a little girl who searches everywhere for a miracle. And it's from the playground, through the hospital, around the world, people were praying, and eventually she finds her miracle in heaven. Never says she died. It's just Jesus called her into heaven. And then in this book, there's a butterfly woven through each page, because that represented her life. Her life was so beautiful, but it just was so awful, kind of like that caterpillar that goes in his little chrysalis and his whole life just comes apart, melts to nothing before he can come out with a beautiful story. And so I wanted to relate that to, even though this cancer diagnosis was devastating, we still have a beautiful story that we can share with others. And so anyway, all that's in the back of the book. And during the time of knowing I needed somebody to illustrate the book, there was another mom in our hospital whose little boy was fighting neuroblastoma, and they were actually in the stem cell unit. And I wrote to her and said, I don't know if you can handle doing this or not, but I wrote this book and I would love to see if you'd illustrate it. And I didn't really tell her what to draw. I said, draw what you see. And of course, she drew the CAT scan machine. She drew the bag of chemo, but she did it in a gentle way, and she wove that butterfly through every one of those pictures. So that was really neat. A neat ending for the book, that we could collaborate. Her little boy is healthy. I can't remember now if it's been 2 full years that he's done with treatment, but he's doing really, really well, and that's exciting. The book I often send to children as they're going on hospice. I write a little letter with it, kind of just telling them, how heaven's not a sad place, that there's no sadness in heaven, there's no tears. And the letter's from Millie, with help from her mama, obviously. And then if the child has already passed away, I will send it to their siblings, because I know my other children struggled. Like, we don't want Millie to die. We don't want, we don't understand where she's going. And in our house, our conversations early on were, what do you think Millie's doing today? What do you think they do in heaven? And we got some crazy answers. At one point, my little boy said, I think they're having a rodeo. She's probably riding a bronco bull, Maybe so, son. I don't know. Anyway, but I wanted to always keep those lines of communication open with my other kids, that you can talk about your grief. Some of my teenagers couldn't talk about it. And I would say, have you talked to Dad? And they'd say, oh, no, Dad'd cry if we talked to him, so we won't talk to Dad about it. And so I became kind of the facilitator for the whole family of, everybody has to talk to Mom about their grief if they're going to talk about it. That's the embodiment of this book, is there's a way to talk to your kids about what's getting ready to happen.
That's hard.
It was hard.
It's so hard. That's been something that we struggle with. For a long time, Zane wouldn't talk about Nora or say anything about her, and I only imagine it's because we would get upset, and obviously not upset with him, but he wanted to do everything in his power to make us happy, and I think he felt like that was his job, to make sure that we weren't sad, and he didn't understand that you can't, that you just sometimes can't be happy through that type of trauma. And I think he understands better now, because we're able to hide our tears more whenever he talks about her, about certain things, or able to control it a little bit better. And he does just randomly talk about her, like miss her, or he just doesn't where is she and why can't she come home, even though we're Christians and we talk about heaven. And I know not every family is religious either, and that may sound like whatever that may sound like in your family, but that's probably one of the hardest navigating through sibling grief as a hurting mom, because you're watching your other children hurt, and so it like brings this whole new side into it. It's not just you hurting, like you're grieving for your child, but now you're grieving for your child's siblings who are also grieving. And so I love that you wrote this book and included that so that the children who have lost a sibling can be included, because I feel like a lot of times that they get left out. Whenever we posted about Nora, passing or this or that everybody was focused on Jeremy and I. Not everybody, obviously. But Zane had his own struggles, and so that's really special that you chose to write a book about that to help the siblings as well.
Back when Millie was sick, it was always, how's Millie doing? How's your mom and dad doing? The kids always felt left out. And when packages would arrive and I would open them, I would say, look, they mailed something for you, and they mailed something for you, even though it was all for Millie. But I made sure and spread it around. And if someone asked me, I said, please send the other kids something too. Not because we want the stuff, but because it can't be everything about the cancer child all the time. It's just like they feel like they're totally forgotten, the other children. So once she did pass away, two things that helped me was remembering what you said. They are so scared we're going to cry. And they do. They want to make us not cry to make us happy. I just tried to really remind myself, yes, I'm Millie's mom, and yes, I'm hurting. But like in any other situation, I'm also their mom. So I have to set my own hurts aside and listen to your little broken heart and really listen to it. And we had some doozies. About the second day after the funeral, my son said, Mom, can we go back to the cemetery? And I said, why would we go? And he said, well, I'm ready to dig her up and see her again. And I said, no, honey, we can't do that. And I had to not burst into tears. I just had to keep it, his real heart is, I just left my sister in a cemetery.
Yeah.
And then I noticed about 6 months later, he came right back. Almost every 6 months for the last 3.5 years, he's come back to rethinking on those same things, almost like he's ensuring himself that it's still truth. And we were driving home one night and he said, Mom, do coffins have locks? And I said, I'm thinking I know exactly where this is going. I said, I don't know. Why are you asking me that? And he said, I just wondered if we could go open it back up and look at it. And I kind of twisted it to, I don't know if they have locks, but I'll look it up for you. And so I called him back the next day and said, I looked it up. And yes, they do. And no, I said, we can't go back there. I said, but we can always talk about her. And I might cry, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with me crying. That just shows you how much we loved her. And so I try to always just make it a safe place where we can talk.
Absolutely. That's so important too. And we had Zane in counseling, and they actually recommended that we stop because they were having to force him to talk about her. And so I think it's also important to, as we're talking about sibling grief, like sometimes the grief comes in waves for them. And kind of what they explained to me is Zane was 5. And so for his age, they said things are just very black and white. She was here and now she's not. And
Right.
There's not really like this gray in between of, well, what about this or what about that? But they said over time, he will encounter different things in his life that are probably going to resurface and bring all this grief back fresh because it's something he couldn't process at his age. And so as he ages in life, it may crop up again and again. And so that's kind of what they forewarned me about. Grief counselors are wonderful, and if you can take your kids to counseling, losing a sibling is tough in any scenario, whether it be cancer or whatever. But yeah, that's tough, and it's tough knowing what to say to them.
We did some counseling with the 2 youngest ones, but it was interesting the whole time we did it, which was about 1.5 years of counseling. We didn't really talk about her at all. it was more dealing with the issues of anger that they were having, that were coming out, that I think were directly related. But, they couldn't talk about that, so they had to talk about something else. It did help us. I was grateful we were able to go through it. We did some biofeedback, which really helped them to relax and not be so anxious. And we finished that about 6 months ago.
Absolutely. Amber, what did Miranda say on y'all's episode? She said something that was, just devastating to hear from a child. Like she was talking about how she didn't want to make Amber upset by telling her how bad she was hurting. Like she was trying to protect her. And that stuff is just devastating what these kids have to go through. The kids who are going through the cancer treatments and the other kids in the household who are having to watch it and also go through it. But man, that killed my heart. I still can't talk about it. I'm glad
It's
that
hard to think,
I'm not
what
glad.
their little brains go through. They endure. They're enduring all of these things, but they're watching it through you in a way. They can see it on your face. And I think kids are compassionate by nature. And, I know Miranda's at an age now where she can be vocal about that, but I'm sure that she's not the only one who feels that way.
And how old is your daughter?
She just turned 12 the other day.
Okay. I have a 12-year-old, and she can still
Yeah,
talk about it.
she just
But my
turned
teenagers
12.
wouldn't.
Yeah, we're at a point now with her where we're able to see some of the positive things that have come out of, you have to find the positive. But that girl has a passion for pediatric cancer, and she is not afraid to tell you about it. She is going to tell you that it is not okay that the government does not give more funding. She's going to tell you that it's not okay that her friends are dying. And I think that it's the parents like you and Tiffany and the kids like Miranda who just get so fired up and who are willing to talk about it that are going to be the reason that there's change. Because if we don't talk about it, it's one of those things where Tiffany kind of said in the beginning, like you're fine one day and then the next day everything changes. We all have, that diagnosis date. For my daughter, it was November 29th. And so you have before November 29th and you have after November 29th. But if you've never walked through this, there's not a way to explain it to somebody who's not a cancer parent. There's nothing you can say that will make them understand. And so I think the only way that there's going to be change is by parents who have walked through it and children who have walked through it talking about it. And so you being willing to come on and share your journey with your family and with Millie, those are the things that are going to make change.
Amber,
Absolutely.
sometimes I fully agree with you in that deep chasm of before and now. And Millie was 3 years old when she died. And Millie's life almost feels like it's 3 parts. There was the before cancer, there was the cancer, and then now there was after death. And it's like, It's so hard to look at that, to look at pictures and think that's the same child. Because before cancer was so normal, the little blonde curls and blue eyes and ponytails and playing in the yard, and, during cancer, a sweet little bald head and never getting in water, and all the things that were so different. Her playground, she played in the snow one time in her life, and it was on the rooftop of the hospital. Stuff like that. That's just a totally different. And then now our life since then, and the day she died, our childhood, young children in our home was done that day. Like, I woke up that morning and I no longer needed a stroller. I no longer needed a car seat or diapers, so it was such an abrupt, it's done, and that just was devastating. I spent about the next 2 years wondering, like, will we have another baby? Not that it would ever replace Millie. Never, never. But just wondering, like, okay, would that kind of fill in my hands, keep me a little busier or something? And then we didn't. And now that I'm older, now I'm okay with that. But anyway, just the thinking of everything in your life changes so abruptly with a cancer diagnosis, and even more abruptly with death. Even though we knew, we had 3 weeks of standing on hospice every day, holding our breath, thinking, is today the day she's going to die? And that in itself is devastating. We got up that morning and we left our house for a few minutes before she died. We left her with somebody else. And I think back and think, what was I thinking? If she died while I was gone, I'd have been devastated. But there were so many things that, you make these choices, and they're hard choices, and there's no right answer. And we most definitely need better treatments for these kids. They need to not lose their hearing. I don't know if Nora lost her hearing, Tiffany, but Millie was going to have hearing aids if she lived. And there were so many, well, if she lives, she might not have teeth. If she lives, she probably won't have children. It's all if she lives, and then she can't even live. It's sad.
Yes.
So sad.
It's absolutely horrible. Where can people find your books to get or connect with you, or tell us, your socials and where we can get Millie Finds Her Miracle?
Okay. I am on Facebook under Millie's Miracle. I have a webpage, milliesmiracle.net. And I am also on Amazon, so you can look me up there. I always try to route people back to my webpage. I don't know if y'all know this, but what I learned is if you sell something off Amazon, you don't get very much money off of it. So our book, we get $1 a book. And that just amazes me, because I don't know how people stay in business. Everything we did, we haven't set up a nonprofit or anything, so our family has funded these books. But we want to be able to give the books to kids. And the only way we can do that is, to keep money coming in to turn around and send it back out. And so if you can buy it off the webpage, that's so much better.
That's amazing. So
we're on Instagram too. So
we'll put all of that in the show notes for people to be able to click the link to your website. I won't put the Amazon link so that they can order from the correct place that gets you the most out of that, so that you can put that back into childhood cancer.
I do have a neat program, if I can tell you just a second. Some people will buy books and they will let me hold on to them until I hear of a child going on hospice. And then I will pay the mailing, and they've already paid for the book. And so we send it out like that. And if you know of someone, a child being put on hospice, if you can send me information, or a child that's recently passed away, then I will send it to them. So I just try to listen and keep my ear out. And then if anybody else sends it to me, I try to get it in the mail.
That's totally amazing. So if anybody listening wants to give another family a book, you can reach out to Courtney and let her know that you're going to pay for books for someone else. Thank you so much for being on and telling Millie's story and just being vulnerable with us today. And we're just so thankful for moms like you who have taken things into their own hands and helped this ever-growing platform of childhood cancer.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to An Unexpected Fight, a pediatric cancer podcast. This is Tiffany and your host, Amber, who have been on the show today along with Courtney Mount, and we hope that you have a great day.